Before you listen to this story, I want you to take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear is not just a story. It's a dark confession of a girl named Elena Carter. What happened to her will chill you to your crevice. Is not a fairy tale of these, is a journal of pain, betrayal, and the terrifying secrets that lived right inside her own house. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this channel because more untold haunting stories are on the way in this one year. Never going to forget. This story is written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries. They say the walls in old houses remember everything, the laughter, the tears, and the screams. He was only 17 when we moved into the Carter family estate in Vermont. Towering Victorian mansion passed down from my great-grandfather. My parents always spoke of it with pride, as if inheriting something so old, so eerie was a badge of honor, but I hated it from the moment I laid eyes on it. My name is Elena Carter, and this is the story of how my life changed the moment we crossed the rusted iron gate. A story that begins with a whisper and ends in blood. The house was set back from the road, hidden behind overgrown hedges and maple trees that stretched toward the sky like broken fingers. It was beautiful in a tragic kind of way. 3 stories high, pale blue paint peeling off the wooden siding, a tower that reached above the roofline like a watchful eye, and windows that always seemed to be watching, even when no one was inside. I remember asking my mother why no one had lived in it for years. She looked at me for a second longer than she should have and said, "Some houses choose when they want to be homes again." I didn't understand it then, but I should have it. At night, as I lay in my new bedroom on the 2nd floor, I heard something, a soft creak, then another footsteps. But no one was awake. I froze under my blanket, holding my breath. Then came a whisper so faint I could barely tell if it was real. Elena. I sat up, my skin prickling. There was no one in the hallway, no one in the mirror. Yet I felt eyes on me. In the morning, I told my dad. He laughed. "Old houses make noise, sweetheart. It's just air in the vents." But it wasn't over. The next week, strange things began happening. Me belongings were moved, not stolen, just shifted. Me phone would die even when fully charged. He started having the same dream every night. I was in the attic, standing in front of a locked door, and behind it someone was crying. He couldn't tell anyone because the truth was, I wasn't sure I was okay myself. Then I found I'd in the far corner of the basement, beneath an old tarp and broken shelves, was a chest, an antique-looking trunk with carvings etched deep into the wood. Me fingers hesitated as I touched the cold metal latch. It opened with a groan, like it hadn't been opened in decades. Inside, a stack of letters, photos, and a small velvet-bound journal of it belonged to Margaret Carter, my great-aunt, a woman I'd never heard anyone in the family talk about. Letters were filled with things that didn't make sense, things about voices in the house, people watching her from mirrors, and dreams that came true. Yon line stuck with me. "They say it's in the blood, Elena, and if you're reading this, then it's already started." I didn't understand who they were or what was starting, but that night I saw here a girl in my mirror. She looked like Messamy. Eyes same freckles, but she was wearing a white nightgown soaked at the hem, and her mouth was sewn shut. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me as blood trickled from the corner of her lips. I screamed at me. Mom ran in and shook me awake. Or so she thought, but I was already awake. That was the beginning. First real night when the house stopped pretending to be asleep and started remembering again. He didn't sleep for 3 nights. After I saw her in the mirror, face haunted the corners of my vision, even in daylight. Never blink, hedge, never move, edge, just stared, as if waiting for me to understand something I wasn't ready for. He began spending hours with Margaret Carter's journal. Pages smelled like mildew and time, but her words were Alavesh wrote like someone trapped, not in chains, but in silence. Your silence that screamed between every line. Mother told me not to go into the crying room. She said the room was built over what used to be a chapel and they buried something there. Not some. Yanesh never explained what she meant. I didn't know where the crying room was, but now I was obsessed, because what if that room had answers? What if the house didn't just remember things? What if it stored them? I started skipping meals, ignoring my mom's calls from downstairs, digging through every floorboard and dusty hallway for that hidden room. And then, on the 3rd floor, behind a bookshelf that didn't I touched the wall. I found a narrow Door no, not just a key leave around. It was cold, still heavy, like something was watching me from the other side. I ran my fingers over the wood. It was warm, almost like breath. Benji didn't want to open it, but I knew I would. He didn't tell anyone, not even my best friend Chelsea, who had been texting me nonstop, worried I'd disappear from the plan. Netch knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to drag her into this net yet. That night, I went back, flashlight in one hand, Margaret's journal in the other, and this time I brought the old ring of keys I found inside the trunk. Most were rusted, some broken, but one was shaped like an angel's wing. It fit. Door opened with a hiss of stale air and a groan like the house was waking up inside. Darkness and the smell of roses, and Rhodey stepped in, and the door closed behind me. Wasn't ready for what I saw. It was a child's room wallpaper peeling in long strips, stained with something brownish. Red. A crib shattered in the corner. Dozens of dolls with their faces scratched out and written on the walls in chalk over and over and over. She never stopped crying. She never stopped crying. She never stopped crying. My knees gave out. In the center of the room was a rocking chair, slowly moving, even though the air was still. He turned off my flashlight for a second. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd see the truth without Aiden. That's when I hear a low, broken sob, not angry, not scariest. Heard it was coming from inside the wall. He pressed my ear against it, and Frazad's sobbing was real, and it was moving from the wall to under the floorboards to behind me. Spun round, but no one was there. Just the chair still rocking. Suddenly the flashlight blinked twice, and then deadened. In that moment of pitch black, I heard it again. That whisper, Elena. Not like before. This time it was desperate, not a warning, not a threat or plea. I bolted from the room, heart in my throat crashing into the hallway like I was being chased, even though nothing followed. Meth door slammed shut behind me, and the key vanished from my pocket. That night, I stared at the ceiling in my bed, too scared to sleep, to awake to cry. Next morning, I was different. People noticed me. Mom asked if I was using drugs. Me dad told me to get some sun. Even Chelsea said I looked like I hadn't slept in weeks. They didn't know I'd started seeing things during the day. Faces behind window shans pressed against mirrors. Footprints on the ceiling. Margaret was right. It was in the blood, and now it was in me. After I escaped the crying room, I stopped being myself. It wasn't dramatici, didn't start levitating or speaking Latin. It was quieter than that, scarier than thought. He started losing time. He'd blink, and an hour would pass. I'd wake up standing in a hallway I didn't remember walking into. I'd find scratches on my arms, on my legs, across my back, like I was crawling through something in my sleep. But worst of all, I started writing in my own journal, not in my handwriting. It began with a sentence that wasn't mine. It's not just her, there were others, and they're angry. I thought maybe I was just dreaming or spiraling, so I tried to distract myself. I told myself it was in my head. Then Chelsea came over. She said I looked pale, sick. Said she hadn't heard from me in days. She hadn't even realized it was Wednesday. She noticed the bruises on my arm, one shaped like handprints. What the hell is going on, Elena? She asked. Are your parents? No, I snapped too quickly. It's not like that. I didn't know how to explain that it wasn't a person hurting. Might was the house, and somehow I was letting it. She didn't believe me. Of course he would, until something happened while she was in the kitchen pouring juice. I went upstairs to get the journal, and when I came back, she was gone. I called her name once, twice, 3 times, nothing. Then I heard Ita scream from the boss, and he flew down the stairs, heart pounding, expecting the worst, but Chelsea wasn't screaming. She was laughing, spinning slowly in the center of the basement, barefoot, eyes glassy, whispering something over and over. She's in the mirror, she's in the mirror, she's in the mirror. I froze. Chelsea, I shouted, stop it, you're scaring me. She blinked, looked at me like she'd just woken up. Then she collapsed. He carried her upstairs, half crying, half breathless. Came to a few minutes later, pale, shaking, confused. I saw her. She whispered, the girl you told me about showed me something horrible. Then she grabbed my hand and said the scariest thing I've ever heard. Elena, I think she's you. That night I couldn't breathe. I sat on my bed with the journal, flipping through Margaret's entries like a mad woman. Buried between 2 blank pages, I found a folded letter load with time torn at the edges. It was addressed to someone named Lillian. You can't hide her forever. If you do, the others will never rest you. Promised balance, but by keeping Her alive, you've cursed the bloodline, I'm sorry. But the house must feed the date. September 3rd, 1966. That was my birthday, not the year obviously, but the day, same date, same cycle. What did they mean by balance? What was the house feeding on? I flipped the page, and there it was, a family tree. What was left of one names scratched out, some circled, and reddenly one name at the bottom wasn't touched. Elena Carter. That night, I dreamed of Margaret. Stood in the crying room rocking slowly, her mouth sewn shut, reached toward me with her hands covered in ash and whispered, even with her lips sealed, "You're the last one." I woke up to the sound of knocking on my bedroom door from inside the wall. After the knocking in the wall, I stopped pretending to be okay, started sleeping with the lights and door locking me back, pressed to the wall like I could melt into it, but it didn't matter anymore. The house knew me now, and I think it had been waiting. Every night was the same, the sound of footsteps above me. Even though no one was on the third floor, voices echoing through the vents, my name whispered like a warning, like a lullaby, and that feeling that I wasn't alone. Even when I could see no unknown night, I gathered everything I had, the journal, the family tree, the letter to Lillian, and I went to the attic as if I was going to lose my mind. I at least needed to know why the attic was worse than I remembered. There was thicker colder, like something up there didn't want to be seen. He sat in the middle of the room and opened the journal. Aganon entry sta outie wasn't dated, it was carved, not written, like Margaret had used something sharp. They lived beneath Usned in the basement beneath the house, buried, bound, forgotten but not gone, never gone, and underneath that a single sentence written in her shaky hand: "They feed on lies and silence." My blood ran cold. This time I thought the house was haunted by her. But what if she was protecting me? What if Margaret was the last one who tried to stop it and failed? I stood slowly staring at the floorboards, and then I heard it again, knocking, but this time it wasn't gentle, it was violent, rhythmically. Fist beating from underneath boards began to shake. Dust fell from the beams and a voice, deep layered, impossible, rose from beneath my feet. Blood debt, blood debt, blood debt. I ran, but the attic stairs had changed, they were longer, twisted handles. No matter how fast I moved, the door at the bottom stayed the same distance away. And then I heard them footsteps behind me, yet not one pair, dozens marching, dragging, breathing. Were coming. Didn't think. I jumped through the railing, through the open space, straight to the second floor. Don't know how I didn't break something. Just remember the scream I let out, raw, terrified, not human. My mom found me at the bottom of the stairs, shaking, whispering, "They're under us, they're still here." She slapped me hard. It wasn't anger, it was fear. "You weren't supposed to go up there," she said. "You weren't supposed to read that journal." And that's when I realized something. She knew me. Mother knew everything, and she'd been hiding it from meth. Crying room, Margaret. Shadows in the wall. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said something I'll never forget. I was the last girl before Yowie locked the door. He buried the journal. He thought if I stayed quieted would skip Yow, but it never skips. Blood. My hands were trembling. "You knew? I asked you, let us move here." She shook her head. "The house called us back. We didn't choose it, it chose you." I screamed at her. I told her she was sick. I told her I was ill. Even again, I meant I tuntled the house took Chelsea. She didn't come to school, didn't answer texts, didn't post anything. Went to her house, and her mom said she left a note saying she had to go back and finish something. She never came home. Her last message to me, a single photo of the Carter house zoomed in on the basement door. He knew what I had to die. Went down that night, heart-pounding, flashlight flickering. The basement was silent until I saw a trapdoor in the far corner covered in dust, chained shut with a rusted lock and a key beside it. How most like it wanted me to find Edie and locked with hinges, creaked, and the smell, God, the smell hit me like a wildered decay. Old blood bellowed. The trapdoor stairstone damp, leading into black. Nessie descended step by steepage, one colder than the last, until I reached its Inferno, a crypt lined with wooden doors, hundreds of them, each marked with a name, and some with mini Elena Carter, Elena Carter, Elena Carter carved over and over like a warning or a prophecy. Wasn't the firsty, wouldn't be the last. Then I saw Chelsea standing at the far end of the chamber, smiling, but her eyes, they weren't hers anymore. Ashup and her mouth, and in a voice that was not her own, she said, "She fed them, no, you will to." Then the doors began to open, Oni by Oni, and the darkness inside wasn't empty, it was hungry. The doors opened one by one, not fast, not violently. They opened patiently, as if the things behind them were stretching, waking up, smelling. Kelsey stood in front of them like a statue, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, and in that moment, I knew it wasn't Chelsea anymore. The girl I knew was Goni, and whatever had taken her place was just wearing her face. I backed up slow, careful, until I felt something behind Mena, a walnut air breath at wet clothes. I turned around and saw nothing, but I heard a voice, like shattered glass. You are not the first, you are the final. I ran through the crypt, up the stone stairs, slamming the trap door behind me. Yet the basement wasn't empty anymore. The walls were bleeding, thick black veins were spreading like rot, crawling across the ceiling, the floor pulsing like they were living. And in the corner was a figure, a woman in a white gown, hair covering her face, hands clasped, whispering something into the darkness. He didn't stay long enough to hear what he burst into the hallway, tripping over myself, heart in my throat, and waiting at the top of the stairs was my mother. Bit her face was pallid, her eyes full of tears. I'm sorry, she said. For what? I creeped. She didn't answer. She turned and walked into her room, locking the door behind. Harry ran after her, banged on the door, begged for an explanation, and after a long silence, she said something through the wood. Your name was Margaret, Auntie, until we changed it. I froze. No, I whispered. I've seen Margaret in the mirror. She was my great aunt. You were her. My mom said not by choice, by blood. Or the echo that came back. The house wouldn't let her go, so it sent her back. I couldn't breathe. I fell to the floor, shaking because it made sense of nightmarish voices. The mirror girl, who looked just like Mike, was maybe not me. Then the family tree didn't yield. The other names had been crossed out except mine. Not because I was the last living Carter, but because I was the only one who came back. He looked down at my hands, and for a brief second, they weren't minute. They were old or bruised, burny, just like in the dream sand. I remembered something I had no reason to remember. Fire screams, being locked in a room and told to pray until it stopped, and a name whispered over and over. Margaret, Margaret, Margaret. I ran from the house outside into the night, but the forest was wrong. It was closer than before. The trees bent inward like arms, and the fog, it wasn't fog, it was breathy, turned back toward the house, ready to leave it forever. But it was gonna, not destroyed, not vanished. It just gonna. In its place was an empty clearing, no structure, no lights, just the imprint of a foundation in the dirt, like the house had never existed. He screamed, crackled at the air until I heard the music box faint instantly, a lullaby I didn't remember, but somehow knew. He followed Iden in the middle of the woods. Their waste crying room, just the room Alana standing, like a mausoleum with no door, no roof, just for walls. Inside was the rocking Sharon, on it a baby doll with black buttons, fries, and dried blood around its mouth. Teed around its neck was a raboner name written in old ink, Margaret Lillian Carter, and underneath it, born again, feed again, begin again. Suddenly the ground shook, and behind me a figure stepped into view. Chelsea, not my mother, Mabbit. Not the now meth Margaret, me wearing a burned dress, lips stitched, eyes wide and hellish, reached out, touched my face, and whispered without moving her mouth, we are not separate, to our one. You are my voice, I am your memory. Then the world turned upside down, and I woke up back in my bed as if nothing had happened. That journal was gone. Basement was sealed. That it was locked. Me mother gone. No one remembered Chelsea. No one remembered anything except me, and on my mirror in red, you are ready now. I stood in front of the mirror for our look, and at her, looking at me, trying to decide where she ended, and I began. Margaret Carter, the girl locked in the crying room, the girl whose voice was taken, the girl who never left. No, she lived behind my eyes. Every time I blinked, I saw things I shouldn't remember. Fire screams, needless shadows singing in the attic, children begging in languages that no longer existed. The worst part, it didn't feel wrong anymore. It felt familiar. He stopped going to school, stopped answering my phone, even if I tried to leave tea. He housed something pulled me back, not with force, with guilt, because I was starting to remember what I did, what she did, and the truth was worse than any ghost who didn't just live in the house. We fed. Edie found the hidden room again, at the crying room, not the crypt. This was something new behind the fireplace. Under the ash and soot was a staircase I hadn't seen before. It wasn't built into the house. It was older stone steps, worn smooth by time. I followed them without knowing why. Each step I took I heard a voice sometimes, it was Minner sometimes. It was Margaret sometimes, it was something else, but all of them said the same thing. They're hungry again. I reached the bottom and found the feeding room round chamber walls covered in carvings. Symbols pulsing like vines, floor made of bone tile sand in the center. A well black, deep breathing knob with air with memory approached it not. Because I wanted to, because I had toffets with the house dose it makes you do things. It plants the hunger in you, it lets you feel the pain, and then makes you believe it's the only way to survive. I looked inside and I saw them, other children, with mouths sewn shut, women in scorched gowns, men without ice, all of them reaching it to drag me down, but to give me so nothing more than. I took it, let them in for the first time in my life. I saw it all. The full cyclevery girl who lived in the house was just another vessel, each one reborn. To finish what the last one called it, Margaret had failed, so had Lily, and so had the unnamed girls before them, but I wasn't supposed to. Because I was the last house was built on top of something ancient, something sacred, something broken. It was never a home, might was a mouth in the Carters. We were the teeth. He opened the journal again that night, but the pages were blank until I bled on it, and the ink returned. Only one entry remained: if you don't feed them, they'll come for you. If you do feed them, you'll become one of them. Either way, the house wins. I had a choice, and that's when Chelsea returned, not in a dream, not in the mirror, and the whole wish looked empty like a puppet with no strings, but she spoke, and this time it was her voice. Elena, she whispered. Don't feed it. Tears filled her eyes. I remembered who I was and what they did to Matthew, tried to make me part of it. But I resisted. You still can't too. I reached for her, and she vanished. Her single feather remained in her place. I cried for the first time in days, because I knew what she meant. House didn't need a victim, it needed a willing own. It needed me to choose. So I went to the feeding room one last time, stood over the well and screamed, you want me? Then take me. But no one else. The well cracked, floor shook, and the shadows rosebud. They didn't attack. Matthew knelt. Margaret appeared behind them, younger, smiling again for the first time. She spoke. Now, you understand. The house pulsed once, then went silent, and I woke up in the front yard. The house behind me, burning. No fire trucks, no neighbors, just flames and the sound of the music box playing its final song. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but ash in the journalist's cover. Now read. Whispers behind the walls ended. The fire burned until sunrise. I watched from across the field, arms wrapped round my knees, as the Carter house, my house, became nothing but smoke, ash, and silence. No one came, no fire department, no police, no curious neighbors. It was like the house had never existed, like the world knew it was time. And yet the journal server sitting in the grass beside me and touched by flames, heavy with silence. I didn't open it, not yet. He sat there for hours, waiting for something to feel final, for the air to shift, for the voices to stop, for the weight to lift. But it didn't, because the truth is, the house didn't move, not physical, not like a structure, but like a parasite, like a memory passed through blood. And now it was inside, minute screaming, not clawing, just breathing quietly, patient. Ladies, passive weeks. He moved in with a distant aunt in Portland, treat to forget, read to be normal. That normal didn't fit anymore, not when I could still hear footsteps behind me on carpeted stairs, when every mirror reflected her eyes, when I closed my eyes and saw that room, the crying room, as clear as daylight on afternoon. I opened the journal again, and one new entry written in my handwriting, though I had never written it. The house burns, but the blood remembers. There must always be a keeper, and now it's you. I slammed it shut and threw it into the ocean, but I knew it would find its way back, because it always does. Night, I had a dream, or maybe a memory, was in the crying room, only this time I wasn't scared. I was home. Dolls were whole, walls were clean, the rocking chair creaked with warmth, not dreaded. Margaret sat beside Mesh, wasn't burnage, wasn't stitch edge, was. Frisch looked at me and said, we all fed the house, because we thought we had to. Were the first to say, not that broke the chain. Then she smiled and touched my chest. But chains don't die, they rest until someone reforges them. I woke up sobbing, because I knew what she meant. It wasn't over, it was paused, and I was the passive keeper. God, if I ever forgot, if I ever denied what happened, the house would return. Maybe not in Vermont, maybe not in wood and nails, but somewhere in a basement, in a school, in someone's childhood bedroom. All it takes is silencing pain, and blood so. I made a choice to tell this story to write it record it release it to speak the truth out loud. So the house couldn't feed on secrets anymore because that's how it grew in quiet and sham mind things. No one wants to say out loud no you've heard it you've seen the crying room you've walked the crypt you've stood in the feeding room and felt the breath of the others that means you're part of it too bit don't be afraid because I broke the chain you're not cursed or witness and that makes you strong it ends with you listening yet hiding it burying herring goes if someday you hear footsteps and you record a voice whisper your name from the mirror didn't run just remember this. The house may knock but you don't have to open the door it anymore thank you this wasn't just horror it was healing. A way to face trauma to burn silence Cito reclaim and name tell us in their comments what part stayed with you the most. What did you see behind the walls? Don't forget to subscribe like and share this story with someone who needs to hear it because some ghosts don't want revenge they just want to be remembered written and edited by Dark Life Side Diaries.